So we have some pre-planned questions for each of our panellists today. So I'm going to start with Professor Fischetti. So Professor, what changes can we make in the way that we educate young people to achieve better learning outcomes, and what opportunities exist in this space to help fulfil for the roles of the future?
First of all, thanks for having me, and what an esteemed panel we have here. And many of you just heard me before. I've got all my jokes you've already heard, so I can't go there. I'm going to start with what I consider to be real change in education that's needed, and that becomes from not all the way through lifelong learning. Many times we have innovations in the way we do things. We'll call that pedagogy, but we haven't changed the way in which the role of the learner is interacting with that. So teachers or instructors or lecturers do things differently, but the students don't. And then we are still assessing fairly traditionally. So if we don't change the way the learner learns, the teacher teaches, and assessment takes place, we haven't actually changed anything. So that's where we're currently relying on assessment systems that are actually designed to sort people. When we only needed about 1/3 of everyone to be kind of highly keen, another third to kind of do the accounting for those top third, and the other third we could carry on our backs. Australia was that wealthy. We could carry about 1/3 of each other on our backs. A country can't survive economically, and it's going to get worse as the knowledge gap between educated and undereducated gets wider. We don't have enough coal to dig out of the ground anymore. So it's going to be the mind versus the mind, which you heard me do earlier. So I think the challenge is, are we up to making passion and personalization the approach, which is how we organize the apps on our phone, or the way we organize most of the way in which we do business that we choose. So I think that is a different approach. The good news is, in the Hunter, we have examples of that. We just don't have them in enough places that it feels like it's taken on sort of a changing of the guard of what momentum is. We need everyone to achieve with their highest potential. We can no longer accept average and mediocre as good enough.
Excellent, thank you. I think that we can all agree we've got the resources here. It's just a matter of actually driving that home. The next question I'll throw across to Dr. Sleep. Can you tell us more about the potential of the Hunter as an aerospace hub, and what can be done today to prepare and to develop our future generations to ensure success within that evolving industry?
Yeah, look, we're very well positioned to be able to tap into the skill sets that we have. I'm going to deviate a little bit from the question, because what John's saying I think is really important. If we do want to get any industry going in the Hunter, we need to be looking at some of these fundamental skills for young people. And we need to, I was just privileged to see John's presentation about how we need to change the way we're doing education. And I'm sorry, the young lady, Riley, who spoke, really nailed what we need to do. Although I work in state office, we were seconded back to our schools just recently for COVID relief because we don't have enough teachers. And I went into a school and there was 5 Year 9 students there, and I said, well, is everyone sick? I said, oh, this is normal, sir. And I found out that these students were just not attending school anymore. They dropped out. So we need to have a think about the fact that these students, when you think about 2.5 years we've just gone through, that is a major component of their life that has just been lost. We now have an education system that is not meeting the needs of our young people, and they're not turning up. So we need to change, as John said, assessment. So is it about a mark or a grade at the end which is meaningless? Or is it about developing the skill sets that are going to drive our economy, which are the technical skill sets and the non-technical skill sets, and in particular being able to problem solve, being able to work in teams, to be able to collaborate, so what we call these soft skills. But also, why do we have an education system that is for basically we need to teach them everything, even if you're not interested in it? My area is in engineering. I loved engineering, but I was forced to do English in the HSC. Now, that would be fine if it actually was English, It was actually poetry appreciation and being able to... And so it's not literacy. People think that they're learning literacy in the HSC. They learn literacy before that as primary school and early high school. So I had, particularly in engineering, unfortunately most of my students were young men. And when I was teaching engineering and we were building bridges and we were testing things and we were experiencing the knowledge, and then the bell went and it was English. Can we stay here, sir? Now, these young people wanted to get into industry. When I was growing up, you could go and get an apprenticeship easily or a traineeship. They're not available now to the way that they were and what we're learning. So what we need to do is find the individual passion that young people want to go into. We need to communicate with them, and industry have a big part to play. Now, to the question of space, I use space in a lot of my work because it's engaging with young people and it's not gendered. So it's a way to engage them into opportunities. And some of the work we're doing at the moment is I've got young people designing, John's point, that student leadership, designing experiments that are going to be potentially put on the International Space Station in the next 3 years. So it's developing a passion. So getting those kids back into the school, rather than someone sitting out the front and talking to them and getting them engaged, the least the teacher talks and the more that the student does and the things that they're passionate about, the more successful they're going to be.
Thank you. It's incredible to think that, you know, the future is so close and that there's so much that we can... There's so much that we can do now to prepare our young people in these industries and these jobs that don't actually exist currently. So I'll move on now to Warwick. So in relation to government work, how can we best advocate to assist our young people to create better futures for them and their livelihoods going forward?
Yeah, look, I think we have this tendency to speak about young people like they're a different species. You know, they have their own category in the statistics and what have you. But I think young people will have some different priorities. I only have an 8-year-old, I don't have a teenager, so maybe they are a different species. I'm sure I'll learn. But the reality is people's priorities are the same as everyone else in the community, right? They're looking for those opportunities to make a good living, particularly to have that security and that durability about what the future looks like for them, and to get a crack at opportunities that are going to allow them to have a good life, of the type of life that they want. The basics are straightforward, and it's the same for everybody. I think in the world that we're in now, a lot of us have been really fortunate that we have come through in a world where employment arrangements, the type of industries, there was more stability there. That's obviously changing at an accelerating pace, and so I think when it comes to what is the role of government and what we should be advocating for, it's what are the tools and what's the type of supports that we need to be providing to young people so that they can meet those basic needs. How are they going to build their confidence that they are going to be able to navigate some really difficult changing industries, regardless of whether you live in the Hunter or Sydney or a rural area or what have you. The world is changing, and it's going to be changing quicker, it's going to be getting harder, and I think we really need to be trying to understand how we do that. For me, it's been really interesting. Until 5 years ago, I had zero idea about how the training system functioned or how our career advisory system functioned, and coming at it with a set of fresh eyes, a whole bunch of it seemed crazy to me, and it still does in terms of how we go about it. And I think there is a few basics. So and in some ways I think I've been able to confirm that some of the things we do aren't very sensible, because you look at other places and they do better. And so I think a few of the things that stand out to me in terms of direct advocacy that supports young people on that journey, you know, you hear a lot of received wisdoms or viewpoints about what happens with the career advisory system in schools, but essentially it's underfunded. advice and the data that's given to career advisors and the training, and I know because I've done the training courses, is not what it needs to be for young people who are navigating incredibly complex labour markets. And that's not a knock on career advisors, it's a knock on the resources that they have, the resourcing that they're provided. And it's madness to me that we haven't fixed that. In every third or fourth suburb, you have a professional whose job it is to help young people navigate labour markets, and they're stretched and they don't get the right support. We need to do better. Other countries do it much better than us, including in our neighbourhood, and to me that should be a real priority. I think the other one, which always surprises me, we all know what is happening and has happened to our vocational education system, and it's a structural problem for everyone. Whether you are a young person trying to work out where's the trusted institution that I'm going to go that's going to kick me off and get me that start in life, or whether you're an employer trying to get young people in the door or what have you, we know it's a problem and it's continuing to erode, and we do need to fix that. I think that's a big structural problem. The last one I'd say, and I think to John's point, this thing about young people, there's too many of them being sent off to university, or alternatively, we have a culture in the region of everyone wanting to get a trade or what have you. At the end of the day, what we need to be doing is reducing those number of people who don't have anything. We need to be getting people into whatever might fit. If you go off to TAFE and it doesn't work for you, then you go off to uni and you work it out. You go off to uni, you might have a nice time for 3 years and get a degree that doesn't help that much, and then you go vocational. That's fine, you go through that process. But it's those people who don't have anything at the bottom, we need to be working on them a lot.
Absolutely. I think it's probably the stigma around that, and society potentially not accepting, or in someone's eyes, if they do decide that they don't like university, to drop out and they decide they want to do TAFE. So I suppose that's the work of us and how we create supportive environments for the younger people that are coming through. Thank you. So we'll move on to Nathan. So what barriers to education and opportunity currently exist for the Indigenous youth within our region? And what support mechanisms can we put into place to overcome these and minimise the barriers?
Yeah, thanks very much. $1 million question. There are lots of barriers. If you look at the historical narrative of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's education in this country, haven't really had the same level playing field. If I think about 4 generations of my family, my grandfather, Cecil Towney, grew up on the Bulgandra Mission at Peak Hill. It didn't really have any access to schooling. Education is very different to schooling. It still is for many people. Schooling is one way that we gain an education. If we look at then my father's experiences, he grew up on the Common, which is just outside the Nenema Mission, outside of Wellington in New South Wales. Dad went through a schooling system where we had policies in place in New South Wales, like the exclusion on demand policy, the clean, clad and courteous policy, which meant that Aboriginal people in New South Wales were denied education. If a non-Aboriginal parent didn't want their child to go to school with an Aboriginal child, then the principal implemented the exclusion on demand policy, and those children were expelled from that school. That policy didn't go out until 1971. And so, these are the types of experiences and barriers that are generational. We have many young people whose parents and grandparents were impacted by those policies. And so there's generational attitudes towards school and government which need to be overcome. And so that takes time, and it takes a different way of thinking. I think one of the things that's really important, and I think it comes to a lot of what's been said already today, is that we actually need to redefine what success is for school. What is it that we're trying to achieve? What is the purpose of schooling? And anyone that was just in John's presentation, he showed the industrial aspect of schooling, and people just being trained up and spat out at the other end for particular reasons. Well, that's not suitable anymore, and we really need to think about what is the purpose of schooling, and what do we need to prepare people for moving forward. For Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, we've never really been seen in the curriculum. That's slowly starting to change, but school is starting to look very different for us. And You know, if I think about my time as a school leader, being able to think about how I implement Aboriginal values into the school system and what that did for the Aboriginal students in those schools, it made a real difference. They were able to start to see school in a different light, and I think if we can start to incorporate some of those ways of being and doing and knowing, it's going to be beneficial. I think if there's ever a time that we need to go back to some of those values, it is now. You know, we're all custodians in whatever we're doing. We're custodians of this land. We're custodians in our particular jobs that we're in. You know, they're all going to outlast us if our jobs exist when we finish. And so we need to think about how we can make things better for our community, for each other, you know, for our land. You know, sustainability is a big value that's everywhere, and you know, how do we start to really think about that and create time and space in what we do in schools to value that and build that into curriculum. So I think, yeah, that there's some of the barriers and some of the ways forward.
Absolutely, and it sounds as though, you know, there's still a long way to go. We have come so far, but there is a long way to go, and each of us in the room play a key role in facilitating that. So the final question that I have is for Liana. So how can we better align the narrative between industry and education, and what more can government do to assist in this space?
Thanks, Danny. So I'll split that question up in half, and the first part is the narrative, and I think if we just stick to one word, and that's connection. So when we can have a connection with our young people, whether they are at school or whether they've left school but they're still in that 17 to 25 age bracket, we have to know that now they've spent 2 years quite isolated and away from reality to what's happening in industry. So we have to take some responsibility as a region and put our hand up as industry representatives and say, we will let you in. Or if we can't let you in, we'll at least explain in a way that young people understand about how to access the opportunities that are available in the region, because we've heard far and wide today that the breadth of opportunity is great. So once we open up that connection, our young people and even our mature age workers, it doesn't matter who we are and what category we fit in, it's just people in general, understanding what education people need to be able to access the opportunities are really important, and the only way that we can do that is by connection. So industry that put their hand up to go into schools and offer their time for an hour and explain to students what a day in a life would look like, and potentially open up their doors to have a group of young students come in and actually do a walk around. The young kids only know what they know, and they don't know what they don't know. So that would be a way of us thinking about how do we change the narrative, and that is uniting and being confident that there are people in that education space, the school community, are really motivated with a structured and a really clear, articulated approach around what the skills are that are needed in the workplace. So it's setting that standard and that expectation really clear from the get-go. When we look at education in a general sense for all of us, it's about understanding what are the skill sets or the micro-credentialing or the short courses that are needed to jump or pivot from one job to another. So again, that's really important from us at Training Services perspective, to be able to understand what are the market gaps, what are you experiencing as a market gap. So the narrative there is, how do we better align what we're doing at a state level and what we're funding at a state level, and how does that meet your needs in industry? Because we know that through a better understanding of what industry needs, we can actually source the right providers and the right opportunities for you. So again, we go back to that connection. And my third point, which is linked to mainly young people, and you know, Riley spoke beautifully, it's the commitment from industry to be able to take on board young people or people without that higher level of skill and 3 years work experience in pouring a beer or whatever. It's being brave enough as representatives and passionate people of who we work for, and know that some people are going to come into our space and not know everything we know. I'm still learning every day. We're all still learning every day. So it's about wrapping our arms around people that may not know everything, but are really keen to work with us. And our region is really rich of great people that I personally sit on many working groups with. The other part of the question is, what can government do better? I think a personal opinion of that is that we need to be aligned, and our priorities need to be aligned. So we need to have a shared vision and shared goals. So we need to know what other government agencies are doing, because our stakeholders in the community are not sure about, is this a local, state or federal piece? Who's funding what? Where are we getting help from? But I met with this person the other day and they said this. So what we need to do better as government representatives is be willing to support one another. And we are doing that. COVID has been a blessing in disguise with agencies such as Investment New South Wales and Regional New South Wales, and even our team here today, because we've started to talk about the same narrative, and that is, how are we going to ensure that our region is rich, it's got a strong economic future, and we want people to work, live, earn, stay, spend here. And we want visitors to come here as well and have the skills and the staffing on board to be able to pour them the beer or pour them the cappuccino on a Sunday morning. So that's my view. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. And just to your earlier points, just in relation to connection in industry, I think it's really important that we do provide youth and future workers with opportunities to come into the business and do a bit of a taste test and see how they like it. In terms of my background, I studied a bachelor's degree at the university, and it was a business degree, and unfortunately they don't offer any kind of internship or practical experience. So that was my challenge, that I was trying to work to pay my rent, feed myself, do all of those great things, but also needed to try and get some practical experience, because that's what employers want at the end of the day. Unfortunately, my degree is just a certificate now. It is my resume and my experience that is what matters. So I think that's really important. I think we have a couple of minutes for a few questions. If anyone has any for any of our incredible panellists, could you please raise your hand? Thank you.
Thank you, panel. That was a really interesting and inspiring conversation. I just wanted to ask Liana a question. One of the things that I've noticed in the last 12 months specifically coming out of your department is the willingness for your team to work a lot more closely to customise solutions for business, but I don't think that businesses understand that. What else could we look forward to, or can you walk us through a little bit more around that change? Because that is quite different. And you are demonstrably trying to work closer with business, but I'm not sure that that message is completely getting through. What's your observation around that?
Yes, so we've really diversified as an organisation through new roles such as regional industry and education partnerships. They're senior project managers and also skills brokers. So they're the two new parts of the business that Paul is talking about. The way that this is working is that people who are in a place and a stage in their work structure that they can put their hand up and say, we need help, and we want to talk to you about our workforce development plan and our pipeline and our investment in, whether it be skills development, apprenticeships and traineeships, but also their existing workers, and potentially I need to shuffle left or right or up to be able to make way for new. So the way that we can do this better is through events like this, where we start to spread the word around what Training Services is actually doing. We try and get it right every time. The skill set piece Paul is talking about is really, really valuable for employers to consider that as just a stepping stone. But we fund that. It's been 100% funded, no cost to the employer or the learner. But how do we improve that? We can only continue to improve the work that we're doing is through engagement from industry. And that is using organisations like yourselves to link back to Training Services and say, hey, we really need your help. We think that you can help us. And the benefit of that cross-collaboration between other government agencies and other industry associations, we are able to find out who is the best person amongst all of that can help you.
Thank you, everyone. There's been some pearls of wisdom in there, but I'll keep one question, and this is for Nathan. I live and work on Darug country in Western Sydney, and we're absolutely blessed with our custodians, the Darug custodians there, and the work they're doing in schools and starting to do more work in schools. Some great stuff happening in the school that is about 1 minute's walk from where I live, and I enjoy listening to the stories and participating online in their own in their assemblies and school presentations where they're actively engaging in language training. One of the challenges I see though is that First Nations custodians have so much to teach us and a wonderful learning style. How can we actually implement that more into the secondary school experience? Because I think it's a challenge with the with curriculum and things like that. It's easier to do it in the early childhood and early learning and primary experience. Have you got some examples that we can sort of start to explore there?
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the opportunities we have is that we're about to go through a big curriculum reform agenda across New South Wales, and so basically K to 12 are getting revamped, the syllabus documents, and really looking at curriculum and where there's opportunities. So there was a big review done by Jeff Masters, and one of the recommendations from that review was that there is a greater emphasis on Aboriginal history and cultures. And so I'm lucky enough to chair the Aboriginal Education Committee for New South Wales, and so that is a very big piece of work that we're undertaking at the moment to fulfil that recommendation from the Masters Review. And that will have an impact not only on curriculum but also thinking about school structures and policies and procedures, you know, where schools are such places of routine, and so how can you start to implement some of the cultural protocols and things that just become natural to those protocols and those procedures that exist in schools. The other thing I think is that as a nation we're starting to get better at recognising the importance of that knowledge as well. So Reconciliation Australia have a process called Reconciliation Action Plans, and there may be organisations in the room that have one of those. During Reconciliation Week, the university facilitated a conversation up at Marook Cultural Centre. We called it Reconciliation Action Plan Learning Circle, and we had over 60 different organisations represented from the Hunter to think about what a coordinated approach might look like to reconciliation for us as a region. Because we were finding there's so many industries, schools, everyone wants a piece of the local Aboriginal people, and they are over-consulted, and they, you know, find it a lot of industry find it very hard, or schools find it hard to engage with elders and different Aboriginal community members. So we thought we could help facilitate that conversation, get everybody in the room and actually help facilitate that. And so I think more of a coordinated approach, not only at schools but also the role that we all play in community and industry to value that knowledge, and that will flow back and forth. So I think schools can do more, but so can our community, to start to shift and change some of the conversations that we have at our dining room tables at a night time about that space, because things are really starting to shift and move. So I've sort of gone off on a little bit of a tangent there, but I think it's related, and reconciliation action plans are a really good way to start to think about how we can build the cultural knowledge and understanding of our workforces. How might we implement an Aboriginal employment strategy? You know, start to think about, as an organisation, what can we do in that space to really contribute to that, and that will flow back into schools as well to show that this is actually something that's really important, not only for us as a school, but there's an expectation from our employers that we have that cultural knowledge and understanding as well.
Thank you. So unfortunately we have run out of time, but a huge thank you to our incredible panellists and also to the audience. I think there's a few key takeaways that we've heard from each of you, and at the end of the day, I suppose it begins with us and the decisions that we make within our businesses. So thank you all.